QAnon.
Secret, powerful network is working to promote its own hidden evil agenda.
Bill Gates created COVID.
The world today has 6.8 billion people. We could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
A secret family is controlling the world.
Gospel claims that the world is run by the Rothschilds.
There are many conspiracy theories and the internet is rife with them. It feels good to know something that others don't. And that's why there's a market for them. And people who look like they dwell in their mother's basement keep making these conspiracy theory YouTube videos. But what if a conspiracy theory was real? And what if this conspiracy tore apart your entire family and completely ruined your life? And the government was in on it all this time. Today, I'll be telling you such a story. But let's first start from the basics. Shinzo Abe, the longest-serving Japanese Prime Minister in Japan, was shot dead while giving a speech on July 8, 2022. This was a huge shock in Japan, a peaceful nation with very strict gun laws, with only one gun-related death reported in 2021. None of the protective services were prepared. The assailant could be seen in the background during Abe's speech in a campaign event. He later simply walked up to Abe silently and shot him twice. The assailant was quickly apprehended, and the Japanese citizens waited for his details to emerge. Was this a political statement? Abe, who comes from a line of politicians, was very popular. Known as a nationalist, he spoke of transforming Japan into a beautiful country, and this detail will become important and scary later on. He was known as someone who was adept in geopolitics, securing his friendship with then US President Donald Trump. This detail will also become important later on. It will all connect in the end. However, Abe was not free from scandals and harsh detractors. His push for Japan to exercise the right to collective self-defense and money-related scandals during his last few years of administration were met with severe backlash. His nationalistic approach resulted in disputes with the Korean government. However, conservatives in Korea do blame their then President Moon for the relationship breakdown. So, was the motive political? It did occur during the 2022 Japanese House of Councilors election, although the perpetrator did say that it had nothing to do with Abe's political belief and that it was a personal grudge. Media labeled him as a terrorist and labeled his crime as an attack on democracy.
民主主義の基盤をですね、覆すことなんですよね、今回の事件っていうのは。
No offense, but you're super wrong, man, as you'll find out. The assailant was identified as a 41-year-old Tetsuya Yamagami, who had served for the Japanese Marine Self-Defense Force for 3 years in the past. From 2020, he worked as a temp staff at a factory, operating a forklift, but quit in May of this year due to feeling ill. This is when the media started painting him in many different ways, until they weren't able to spin the story anymore and keep hiding the inconvenient truth. He was first painted as the quiet one. The journalists scrambled to get their hands on his school yearbook and interviewed his classmates. During the initial coverage, his former classmates interviewed said he was quiet and didn't have many friends. It's always the quiet ones, isn't it? Ugh. His former employer at the factory said that he was okay at first, but became troublesome at around April of this year, getting into quarrels with his colleagues before quitting. So, was he a quiet, difficult person with no communication skills that just snapped? Another thing that Japanese people started talking about was the concept of muteki no hito, or an invincible person. This refers to someone who has nothing to lose and decides to go all out before they get arrested. I talked about this concept in this video, But in recent times, Japan has seen many high-profile cases of men randomly attacking others, just for the hell of it, committed by such invincible people. This video by Hiroyuki, a professional talker, and I'm not joking, people pay to watch him troll others. In this video by Hiroyuki, posted on July 10th, that gained over 1 million views immediately, he says that most Japanese people who feel ostracized by society choose to take their own lives. But once in a while, there are those who decide to take out their anger onto society. Hiroyuki says that this is why we have to rethink before we ostracize people from society. Japan is a country in which once you step out from the normal path, it will become near impossible to find a stable full-time job. Especially after the burst of the bubble economy in the early 90s, many young adults struggled to find jobs in the 1990s and early 2000s. Tetsuya, despite being brilliant enough to attend a high school with good academic records, never finished university, and before getting arrested, lived in a small $275 a month apartment by himself, avoiding interacting with his neighbors. Tetsuya indeed obtained several qualifications, including Financial Planner Level 2, which showed that he did try to turn his life around. Residents in his apartment complained about loud noise coming from somewhere within the building. Little did they know that Tetsuya was building a within his small apartment unit, where he assembled different parts he bought to create several and cars. Over the weekends after the shooting, it was reported that Tetsuya's motive was toward a particular organization, and that he was under the impression that Abe had connections with this organization. He also believed that Abe's grandfather had brought this organization to Japan. Some tabloid papers and foreign press actually identified the organization by its name, but the mainstream media avoided outright naming this organization. Was it because of the election going on, or was the media just making sure they got all the details? We don't know. However, people online already figured out which organization Tetsuya was referring to, and started talking about the connections it had with the LDP. The election results announced on the 11th Monday presented an overwhelming victory of the ruling party, the Liberal Democratic Party, or the LDP. And this is the party that Abe belonged to. Non-Japanese people may be surprised to hear this, but the LDP has been in power almost continuously since its foundation in 1955. Pundits believe that undecided voters chose to vote for the LDP following Abe's assassination. Before Abe's assassination, there was another controversy that occurred during this election that proved to be quite significant later on. It involves a small populist party called the NHK Party, which is run by this guy.
ご一緒に NHK をぶっ壊す。
So, the NHK is a state-run public broadcasting company, and these guys want to smash it. On June 26, Atsuhiko Kurokawa, one of the NHK party candidates, goes absolutely off the rails in a TV debate.
憲法改正で優先する項目は何ですか？
サイレントインベージョンを止めなければなりません。宗教勢力が海外の勢力のスパイ活動の隠れ蓑に使われていると思います。
黒川さん、
外国
テーマに
人
沿って発言してください。
上海電力問題とかお話しされた方がいいんじゃないかと思います。先ほど
討論のテーマに沿って発言してください。
I actually love the reaction of the host. His reaction is so Japanese.
テーマに沿って討論のテーマに沿って発言してください。黒川さん、討論のテーマに沿って発言してください。個人の名前を出すことは控えてください。
And he doesn't quit just yet.
安倍のせいだ。
テーマから外れて個人名を出すことはやめてください。やめてください。
One conspiracy at a time. No talks about the CIA for now. Let's focus on the first one.
統一教会の集会に安倍晋三元総理大臣が参加しており、統一教会を日本に持ってきたのは岸信介氏、 安倍晋三氏のおじいちゃんです。安倍のせいだ、こんな日本になったのは、おじいちゃんの代から CIA エージェント。
It's good to stay at the YMCA. That was cringe, but it's okay. At the time, I only saw the headline and didn't think any of it. I just thought the guy was spouting crazy conspiracy theories. I knew of the term Moonies, but I've never heard of the Unification Church back then either. I didn't know that they were the same thing. In 2017, an article came out explaining how Abe managed to be the first world leader to have a meeting with Trump. According to the article, Hak Jahan Moon from the Unification Church and Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump's husband, worked as the go-between to make this meeting happen. If I had read this back in 2017, I would have just said that it was a conspiracy theory and wouldn't have cared at all. But this guy, he was actually correct.
おじいちゃんの代から CIA。
The Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, widely known as the Unification Church, was founded in 1954 in Seoul, South Korea, by Sam Myung-moon. In the West, its members are commonly referred to as the Moonies. After Moon's passing in 2012, fights broke out between family members as to who will next inherit the church. Hak Jahan, who married then 40-year-old Moon when she was only 17, is now serving as the current active leader. The Unification Church's teaching is based on the Bible, and Moon declared himself to be the Messiah, the second coming of Christ. According to its teaching, Christ has failed for not having kids. For the Moonies, the family is everything. According to their belief, only heterosexual married couple can enter the heaven. So I guess Neil Patrick Harris is going to end up in hell. This is why massive wedding takes place, where followers are matched up, often meeting their spouse for the first time a few days before the wedding. Although it has been already viewed as cultish and problematic in the West, they come with added shocking controversy in Japan because of their Japan-specific mission. But before going into that, let's answer this question first. So, did Abe's grandfather bring the Moonies to Japan? Abe's grandfather, Nobusuke Kishi, was actually suspected as a Class A war criminal. However, as the Cold War intensified, the US decided to make Japan a foothold for fighting against communism, creating an anti-communist, pro-US state within Asia. Kishi was then released, the US believing that he could help in this effort. In order to strengthen an anti-communist base within Japan, Kishi helped the Unification Church gain grounds in Japan between 1957 to 1960. There's even a photo of him shaking hands with Moon. Needless to say, South Korea is right next to North Korea, which was founded as part of the communist bloc. So the anti-communist sentiments were very strong in South Korea back then. Anime fans will know that right now, the anime Spy Family, loosely modeled after the Cold War, is popular. But you know what, Anya? This girl does not exist in the real world. Things aren't as cute in the real world. Anyway, the church had faithful disciples who would devote their lives to fight against communism, both in Japan and South Korea. As the student movements gained traction in Japan during the 60s, which was heavily communist-oriented, the ties between the conservative Japanese government and the church became even stronger.
アジアに偉大なる指導者現る。その名は文鮮明。
Most Japanese people had no idea about this long history between the LDP Japanese government and the Unification Church before the incident. These clips are now just being rediscovered, garnering millions of views by people who are just learning about this. The magazine The Economist flat out states that the Japan headquarters of the church was built on Tokyo land, once owned by Kishi, while the church states that the church happened to be next to Kishi's house. Completely a coincidence. Abe's father also has connections with the church. The church tried to make Abe's father, Shintaro Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan because in 1984, Moon became imprisoned in the US for tax evasion. By making him the Prime Minister, the church had hoped Moon would be allowed to enter Japan. This just shows the historical ties that the Abe Kishi family have had with the Unification Church for decades. In 1992, Moon, who shouldn't be allowed to enter Japan because of his past conviction, was actually allowed to enter Japan during the LDP administration. The church and the government started to develop more ties, since the church followers would work for free during election time and would beg to work as secretaries for free. Free human labor is godsend for politicians because election campaign can take a lot of work. For example, you know those election posters that you see on the streets? Each of those posters need to be stamped individually in Japan. So church followers would do these menial tasks for free and never complaining about it. This is because they are taught that the conservative politicians are doing the will of God, passing the laws that the church would want. Even in the West, the Unification Church are considered to be a cult. However, this group has a specific agenda within Japan that caused Tetsuya to snap. In Japan, especially during the 80s, the Unification Church was known for selling spiritual goods. This practice is referred to as spiritual sales, and it would involve pressuring people to buy expensive seals, pots, and pagodas. People were threatened that they needed to buy these items to help their ancestors who were being tormented and to make sure that their descendants will live peacefully. I'm not sure why people would think that their ancestors did something so horrible that they wound up in hell. According to a really good article by the Washington Post, church members in Japan would scan the obituaries and knock on people's doors and tell them that your dead loved one has communicated with us and they want you to go to your bank and send money to the Unification Church so that your loved one can be elevated in the spirit world. So you're telling me that my loved ones are contacting some random strangers and not me? I'll be so furious if that happened. This woman was told that her son was tormented in hell and needed her help.
マインドコントロールにかかった人間と言われても私自身は全くその意識はありませんでした。
入信から2年、三男ので精神的に不安定な状態に陥っていたという。
息子さんが降りてこられて、やはりその自分の生命保険の金献金してくれって心身ともに言われてますよね。言われる一言一言がもう本当信じてしまう。
三男の生命保険金から1200万円を献金したといいます。
Why would a spirit want insurance money? Hearing the testimonials of actual victims really hit you as well. This tactic may sound ridiculous to non-Asians, but in Japan, people often believe in the spirits of the ancestors and spirits of child who died in miscarriage. The church would often approach potential recruits by first hiding their motives and would only reveal that they belong to the Unification Church once the human connections have been established. Needless to say, recruiting people by hiding your group's name is an illegal practice. For example, this journalist, who used to be a follower of the church, said that when he was in the university, he was invited to play volleyball with his friends, only to later find out that all the people who were there were church followers. No offense to volleyball players, but volleyball just sounds like a go-to sports of a cult. I don't think a cult would ever choose, say, a game of pool or surfing. He also said that the church always had answers for every suspicion he had. For example, he was later explained that it was a club for studying the Bible. When he thought that that was weird, they explained to him that, so you're thinking of getting a job after graduating from university, right? Well, it's important to know about international relations, and the Bible is the most read book in the world. Harry Potter is probably the second most read book, but reading it won't help you get a job. It might make you transphobic though. Going back to the spiritual sales, according to the lawyers from the National Network of Lawyers Against Spiritual Sales, Followers are asked to buy a holy scripture that costs up to 30 million yen.
かつその信者一人に1冊というんじゃなくて、信者一人に4冊も5冊も売りつける場合があります。
As a side note, the price for such items are said to change depending on how much money the follower has. This man who is suing the church said that his mother, who was a follower, had books sold to her at a price of 4.3 million yen. So the prices aren't unified per se. These exorbitant sales have led to many lawsuits later on, with the church losing in most of them. The network of lawyers said that they have received more than 34,000 church-related consultations between 1987 and 2021, with the cumulative damage from such consultations being, okay, this is a lot of money. Let's see if I can get this right. The damage being at least 123 billion yen. That is a lot of money. A former Korean pastor who used to work at a Unification church in Japan said that Japanese churches would have quotas ranging from 200 million to 1 billion yen, and such money is sent to the Korean Unification Church headquarters. A magazine article published in 2011 made accusations that with the money that the Japanese churches sent, the church used the money for such noble expenditures as the Moon couple's gambling and hiring the K-pop group Girls' Generation for Korean followers. By the way, I'm just reporting what the article said, so don't shoot the messenger. However, such sales and lawsuits only occur in Japan and are unheard of in the US and South Korea. So why only Japan? According to the theology professor Sakurai, this is because the Unification Church has the mission to procure funds in Japan and to send it to the South Korean headquarters.
統一教会の根本は韓国ナショナリズム、キリスト教的な要素を整ってますけども、ここに日本人が入ると徹底して搾取されるという。
As you might be already familiar, in the Old Testament, Adam and Eve ate from the tree of wisdom, with Eve eating the fruit first and handing it to Adam. In Moon's theology, the church views Korea as the Adam country, home of a master race destined to rule the world, and Japan as the Eve country. Since Eve is responsible for the fall of mankind, Japan is to be subservient to Korea and made to be responsible to secure the funds. Not only does this view women to be inferior, the church teaches Japanese followers to follow Korea's orders. Where are Lacey Green and Anita Sarkeesian when we need them? Japanese followers are taught that humans are fallen beings, and by offering money, people can finally become the child of God. The church is only interested in followers that can provide money or human resource. So followers who had to declare bankruptcy due to excessive donations are discarded away by the church. Even in terms of the massive wedding, Japanese followers are asked to pay more than the Korean followers, with Korean men allowed to join the wedding even if they don't follow the teaching of the church.
本来はどちらも熱心な信者じゃなきゃいけないんですけども、韓国の男性と日本人女性のカップルの場合は、韓国はキリストが生まれた国で霊的に高い。だから信仰が強くなくても韓国の男性の方が偉いんだという日本人女性は徹底してハベル尽くさなければいけないってことを教え込まれてね。だからそういう DV とかがつながるね。
So Korean incels, you know where to go if you're desperate and want a brainwashed, obedient Japanese woman who are told that marrying a man from the country of the Messiah is the best happiness they can get. If Elliot Roger were Korean, he would have joined them. According to Amane Sakaki, a former follower, she paid 1.4 million yen to join the wedding, got married to a Korean man who didn't speak Japanese, and was physically abusive toward her. She also stated the following.
日本人の女性信者たちを韓国にセミナーで呼んで、徹底的に日本は従軍慰安婦の問題であるとか、韓国をこれだけ苦しめてきたのだから、日本人の罪を清算しなければいけないということ、罪悪感の植え付けとともに徹底的に教育されるという期間がありました。
Such statement is heard elsewhere as well. During the press conference held by the National Network of Lawyers Against Spiritual Sales, a former believer made the following statement. This woman joined the church because her mother had joined.And she wanted to make her mother happy.
合同結婚式を受けることになりました。教会から言われたことは、すべてを神に預けて、断っては 決していけませんということを誓わされました。相手は韓国人でした。その当時私は21歳でしたので、相手は19歳でした。で、その人は家もなく、職もなく、親もない。そして学歴は中学中退。住むところがなかったので、教会に転がり込んできた男性でした。気に入らないことがあると、私のことを売る人でした。彼が日本での永住権欲しさに統一教会を利用したということでした。教祖が言う韓国の裏若き乙女を従軍慰安婦として蹂躙した過去が日本人にはあるから、韓国の古事記と結婚させられても感謝しなければならないという根本的なそういう反日的な教えがあるからなんですね。だから日本人はそう大金を払わされて当たり前、大金を払わされて感謝しろという言い方をよくしていました。
The Japanese public is only learning about this story now, and many people just had no idea about this. The only time I've heard of the Moonies was from The Simpsons.
This is ridiculous. We're already married.
At least you got to choose your mate. We got matched up on the printout.
And I had no idea how closely linked they were with the LDP. So how is it that the problem with the church has been going on in Japan all this time and we've never heard about it? To answer that question, let's go back to the 90s. People alive in Japan back in the 90s would remember that the Unification Church was big news back then, since 3 popular celebrities had joined the church. I love the logo, so 90s. When popular news presenter Keiko Iiboshi joined the church, her father, a journalist, held a press conference and declared a war against the church.
その戦いに勝つ自信はおありですか？
もちろんですよ。当然の話です。戦う以上は勝ちますよ。
お嬢さん、恵子さんに今何ておっしゃりたいですか？
ドアは開かれていると。
Keiko, who later left the church, said that seeing her strong and powerful dad frail and weak really spoke to her, and that the church even had a manual on what to say to your family members if they opposed your faith. Hiroko Yamazaki, an Olympic gymnast and popular celebrity, even took part in the mass wedding held in Seoul. She had lost her mother a few months before joining the church. In 1993, thanks to the effort by her family members and a Christian pastor, who actually knows about the Bible so he can contradict Hiroko's belief, Hiroko was able to leave the church and apologize for being the poster child for the church. The news about the church was everywhere in Japan back then. So why is it that people forgot about the church? You see, it's because of what that doomsday cult Abe Shinzo did in 1995. Before 1995, this religious group was not considered to be a cult, but just a kooky, harmless religion, even appearing on national TV. Little did the public know that Abe had some of their followers trained in the Russian army and was buying actual military weapons. These guys were not joking around. By the way, I'm still traumatized that some Japanese people told me that I looked like their own leader when I had my hair long. I was also fat back then because of my medical condition, so that didn't help. But in 1995, Abe released the nerve agent gas, sarin gas, in crowded Tokyo subway. This is the worst domestic terrorism that occurred in Japan to this date. After the subway incident, the Abe group was completely disbanded, with perpetrators jailed. So you'd think that after the Abe incident, the Japanese police would take issues of cults more seriously. A viral clip may explain why this wasn't the case. Yoshifu Arita is a politician and a journalist specializing in the Unification Church at Abe. He lost in the recent election, so he can now devote his time to this cause. Funny how things work out, eh? Recently, he appeared in a daytime talk show explaining how back in 1995, he was asked to give lectures at the police headquarters. According to Arita, he was told that the police was looking into taking down the Unification Church after Abe. However, as we know, nothing happened to the church. 10 years later, Arita asked the officials of the police agency why nothing had happened, and this is what he was told.
一言ですよ。政治の力だった。圧力。それで今に来てるんですよ。
As the Japanese public got to learn more about the connection between the church and the government, and the kind of things that they taught the Japanese followers, more details on Tetsuya's life also emerged, including his Twitter account, painting a better idea of what his life had been like. His Twitter account name was Silent Hill 333. As it happens, Silent Hill 3 is a well-received video game about a girl who fights against a cult that killed her family. Tetsuya Yamagami actually came from a relatively affluent family, his mother the daughter of a construction company. At the end of the 1970s, Tetsuya's father, who worked in the same company, married Tetsuya's mother, and then they moved to Tokyo. Tetsuya's maternal grandfather later heavily regrets this decision. Between the end of the 70s and early 80s, the couple had 3 children, an older brother, Tetsuya the middle child, and then Tetsuya's younger sister. Although this sounds good, the neighbors at the time said that the Yamagami house was quite peculiar. One former neighbor still remembers to this day that shouting could be heard from the house all the time. The husband shouting while slurring his speech, probably drunk, and the house was always messy. Perhaps to escape from the violent outbursts and physical abuse of her husband, this is when Tetsuya's mother starts to immerse herself into a religion commonly referred to as Asaokikai, or the Morning Rise Association. Although the association asserts that they are not a religion, but simply demonstrates a way of living, the members are asked to buy dozens of association newsletters and to distribute them door to door. The Morning Rise Association involves congregating at 5 in the morning and having its members vow to live the day actively. Because of this, Tetsuya's mother would leave the house early in the morning. The neighbor at the time said that they once saw a young boy, aged about 2 or 3, coming out of the house barefoot, wearing dirty, unchanged diaper, crying and looking for his mother. This already sounds horrible, but Tetsuya's mother further devotes herself into this association, probably compounded by her mother's passing that took place during this time. Tetsuya's father's job at the time was a site supervisor of a tunnel construction, which means that the job was demanding, forcing him to spend time in the mountain as the tunnel was being built. Having to deal with his alcoholism, his wife's religion, neglect the house, and depression, Tetsuya's father becomes emotionally unstable, terminating his life by throwing himself off of a hospital building. Tetsuya was 5 at the time. He felt guilty for his father's death, blaming that this happened because he sided with his mother to make her happy. After the father's death, the Yamagami family moved in with Tetsuya's maternal grandfather. The mother became in charge of accounting in the grandfather's firm. We could assume that Tetsuya's mother felt vulnerable at this time, following her mother's death and the death of her physically abusive husband. Not only that, Tetsuya's older brother suffered from pediatric cancer and lost the sight in his right eye. In addition, he already had a minor disability after sustaining a head injury when he was little. All this had made her an easy target. In 1991, when Tetsuya was 11 years old, the mother then joined the Unification Church. Tetsuya wrote on Twitter, "When I was 14, our family was torn apart. The Unification Church makes their believers steal, embezzle, and con their family members and have the believers donate all the money." During this time, the mother had already made considerable donations, selling the grandfather's land without his permission, and he became furious, taking a kitchen knife out. Tetsuya wrote on Twitter, "Our grandfather gathered us siblings and apologized to us as he cried. He apologized that he didn't raise his daughter properly and that he shouldn't have let her marry our dad. I don't know what I should have thought back then or what I should have said. I still don't know to this date what I should have done. After the grandfather died, Tetsuya's mother sold the house and the construction company she had inherited, donating 50 million yen, or $363,000 to the church. She had also donated the 50 million yen insurance money from her husband's death. In 2002, she declared bankruptcy, which meant that the family was poor, despite having had at least 100 million yen at one point. The mother during this time would go to South Korea, where the church headquarters were located, for a thing called the 40-day training, and would leave the children alone. The children would often go hungry, and at one point, the eldest brother called his paternal uncle, saying that there is nothing to eat. The uncle rushed to the house, only to discover that there was no food in the house. In an interview, the uncle said that the mother had asked him to lend her money several times. She begged him, saying that the money was necessary to quell the spirit of her late husband, the older brother of the uncle. The uncle said, "She asked me money so many times I got sick of it. At one point, she came knocking on my door 2 days in a row, so I threw tea at her, shouting, 'Leave!' She would later come to my law office and even called me from Korea. When it comes to the church, she would lose all logic." In 2002, Tetsuya joined the Marines, unable to attend university due to the lack of money. 4 months later, Tetsuya himself tried to take his own life. However, the ambulance was called in time. When Tetsuya recovered, he said that because his brother and sister were having difficulties due to being poor, he wanted to take his own life so that the insurance money will go to them. When the uncle called the mother, she was in Korea doing her 40-day training. Later in the year, the mother declares bankruptcy. The uncle tried to help the children by getting the money that the church had sucked up. The children had lost their house and the church had sucked up over 100 million yen. In 2009, the church gave back 50 million yen and asked the uncle to leave the church alone after this. However, the mother then donated the money once again. The mother said that she needs to keep donating because her husband's spirit is lost and wandering. Tetsuya's difficulties keep continuing. In 2015, feeling despair about his future, Tetsuya's older brother took his own life. Tetsuya, who rarely showed any emotions, broke down, saying, "Why did you die, you idiot? If you keep living, something good will happen." Former follower of the church who knew Tetsuya's mother said that they lost their faith when the church pretty much discarded the mother once she had no money. The representative from the church did say that the mother left the church once, but started to attend meetings once a month from about 6 months ago. This is shortly before Tetsuya started causing problems at work before quitting. Running out of money after quitting his job, Tetsuya decided to act within July, and that there was one thing he had to do before he died. Tetsuya couldn't forgive the church and set his eyes to Abe, who he believed was connected to the church. However, Abe wasn't his initial target. In his tweets, he actually praised some of Abe's policies and showed no personal hatred toward Abe. In 2019, Tetsuya went to an assembly held by Hakja Han in Aichi, Japan, armed with a Molotov cocktail, but he could not enter the venue. He kept vying for the right time to get his hands on Hakja Han, but the COVID pandemic came, which meant that she no longer was visiting Japan. And due to strict COVID regulations, he didn't think he could leave Japan to go to Korea either. In September 2020, Tetsuya saw a videotaped message that Abe had sent to an online meeting of the Universal Peace Federation, or UPF, an organization founded by Moon and his wife, Hakja Han. Trump has actually sent a message during this conference as well.
I want to thank, in particular, Dr. Hawk Jahan Moon.
By the way, Trump is trumping during this message in that it starts with him congratulating the church, then moves to himself congratulating his presidential policies. Pence and Trump have spoken virtually for this year's event, and this might be completely unrelated, but during the January 6th attack on the Capitol, the leaders and disciples of the Sanctuary Church were there. Sanctuary Church is one of the offshoots of the Unification Church. Politicians sending messages to a religious organization is problematic because by saying that they are endorsing the organization, people could be convinced that it is a proper organization. Followers are shown pictures of Moon shaking hands with different politicians over and over again to convince them that Moon is wonderful, that he's the Messiah. After seeing Abe's message, this is when Tetsuya started to think about targeting Abe. In the autumn of 2021, he starts to create his firearm based on his knowledge and YouTube videos. This venture will lead him to be in a debt of over 1 million yen. In a letter he sent to a blogger critical of religious organizations, he wrote, "Previously, I had written to you that I want to get my hands on a gun so bad. I've been devoting myself to procuring a gun since then. It was as if I was acting like a Unification Church member who devotes all of their lives to the fake Messiah." On July 7th, Tetsuya went to facilities in Nara related to the church to test his gun. Despite bullet wounds being left behind, the church had not contacted the police back then. He visited Okayama, where Abe was giving a speech, but couldn't get near him due to the security present. On the way back home, he learned that Abe will be coming to Nara on the 8th and thought to himself that this was his chance. In the aforementioned letter, there were passages such as, "Abe isn't my actual enemy. He is merely the most influential church sympathizer in the world. Even if I wanted to annihilate the entire Moon family, I am aware that that is not possible. I thought of taking down Hakjahan, or at the very least, one of her offspring, but that may only make the third or the fifth son happy. I no longer have the capacity to think of the political significance that Abe's death will bring." His mother and sister are currently at the uncle's house in Osaka. The mother has stated that she feels guilty that the incident has led to criticism against the church. According to the uncle, she defended her choice, saying, "Me joining the church has not affected Tetsuya's life. He could have gone to university if he wanted to. He could have found the money somehow. The assassination and the church are completely unrelated." As for Tetsuya's younger sister, according to tabloid reports, she told her acquaintance that, "I haven't met Tetsuya for 4 years. What he did is none of my business." The connection between the Unification Church and the Japanese government was an open secret all this time, but I don't think most people cared or knew exactly how much influence the church had. But now, as news reports in Japan cover this topic daily, people are starting to see how deep this connection goes. Conspiracy theorists in Japan must be really happy now that their suspicions have been proven correct. Just like how hypochondriacs and obsessive-compulsive people were prepared for the pandemic. When the pandemic came, I bet they were like, "Yes! I've been ready for this my entire life." People started finding different connections between the LDP politicians and the church, and even tabloids started printing out lists of how the politicians and the church was connected. For example, Tomomi Inaba, a politician very close to Abe, had posted on her homepage a picture of her attending an event held by a church-affiliated organization. But the photo has since been removed. She told the reporters that her homepage was just renewed and it wasn't intentional. I'm not saying that she's lying, but it's a lot easier to lie when you're wearing a mask, isn't it? And once you start looking for connections, they are everywhere. Abe's slogan, "Beautiful Country," remember that one? That is very reminiscent of a book by the first president of the Japan division of the Unification Church, titled "A Beautiful Country, Japan's Mission." And what about the LDP logo and the church logo? Do you think they look similar? And oh my god, the posing is the same! I think the last one is a little bit weak. That being said, I have to applaud the person who picked up that one of the books in the background of an NHK show is an autobiography of Moon. Oh, it's alright. It's a bunch of books I haven't read yet. And yes, former followers have stated that the church does instruct followers as to which politicians to vote. And the following disturbing audio clip does prove this. This recording features Yoshiyuki Inoue, who was an aide of Abe. Although in the 2019 election he lost, but for this past election, it seems like he had some extra help and he did manage to get elected. Let's see what happened in an event held by an organization related to the church.
井上先生はもうすでに飼育になりました。大好きになりました。勝つことは善であり、負けることは悪でございます。私が正直に言っちゃっていいですか。同性婚反対ということ、同性婚には反対ということを信念を持って言い続けます。
Well, at least he's passionate about the gays. The hashtag, so the LDP was just the Unification Church after all, started trending, with over 240,000 tweets made in just one day. At first, some TV commentators tried to downplay the connection.
世の中にね、宗教をめぐるトラブルはたくさんあります。安倍さんに責任の一端があったかのようなね、そういう印象操作になっていて、彼の妄想にですね、加担しちゃいけないんですよね。
宗教団体等々が掲げているイデオロギー的な世界平和ですよね、世界平和を願おうよというような動き、反動を寄せられる政治家っていうのはいらっしゃると思いますね。
But yeah, at this point, when there's so much incriminating evidence, there's no use trying to hide it. By the way, I'll be doing a body language reading of that clip with Luli Mura soon. Some news coverage try to distract the viewers' attention away from the church by giving bogus reasons, such as social media. Everyone blames TikTok for everything these days. Why not blame this on TikTok as well, eh?
自分の身勝手な理由によって他人を攻撃する事件は最近相次いでいます。
SNS で幸せ自慢が多くを知るので、それを見て、自分は幸せではないので、幸せをぶち込ましたいと。
Oh my god, are you freaking real? You can't blame social media on everything. The only thing you can blame the social media for is my insecurities over my body image. Please tell me I'm beautiful and I'm worthy of being loved. And now, a lot of things that just didn't seem to make sense before actually makes sense now. So the church holds conservative values such as no sex before marriage and being against same-sex marriage. I always wondered why Japan was the only country within the G8 in which same-sex marriage wasn't legal, when even the latest public opinion poll said that 65% think it should be legalized. I also didn't get why many politicians were against making the morning after pill purchasable at a drugstore without prescription. They would say things like, it causes women to be more promiscuous.
男女平等は絶対に実現し得ない反道徳の妄想です。
国民の生活が第一なんて政治はですね、私は間違っていると思います。
And do I have to mention about that weird thing that happens with Japanese adult films? It makes so much sense now. Politicians represent those who support them, and some of these supports come from powerful groups. One famous example is how the NRA, the National Rifle Association, is powerful and spends a lot in lobbying. Largely because of this, the US hasn't been able to pass any gun reform laws, despite numerous school shootings. However, the Japanese constitution stipulates the separation of church and the state, which means that no politicians should be endorsing any religious organization. More than that, no politician should be supporting a group that is known for illegal actions and focuses on exploiting people of the nation they're representing. Some of you might have wondered, wait, isn't Abe and the LDP nationalistic? Wouldn't that go against the church, which sounds like a Korean nationalist group? In theory, they should butt heads. However, as Professor Sakurai states, they probably just use each other when they can. One thing people often forget is that all this is political. It's not just about the issue. It's like how owning a gun has become a political issue and a sense of identity to some people. In order to survive in the political world, You need to be good at reading which way the wind is blowing and forming the right alliance. If not, you could lose your base, and we are already seeing people scrambling to make the right move. LDP politician Shigeru Aoyama has been appearing in the news by admitting that some LDP politicians who do not have enough votes can get votes from the church.
支援が正当と思うんであれば、有権者にあらかじめ知らして、選挙の審判を受けるべきだ。
I think it's good that he's coming clean about this, but the cynic within me is wondering if he's thinking about the future. The opposition parties, including the Communist Party, is setting up teams to pursue matters related to the Unification Church. Maybe the Communist Party can become popular again like they did in the 60s. Chang Huang-kwak, the former second-in-command of the Unification Church who left in 2009, has apologized to the Japanese people.
本来の教えを守っていたら、日本の信者にも不幸なことは起きなかったはずです。
However, spiritual sales had already taken place when he was in the church. His daughter is also married to one of Moon's sons, who is currently operating organizations affiliated with the church. No major election will take place in Japan for the next 3 years, as more and more politicians are found to be connected with the church. Will the Japanese public remember about this incident during the next election? The Japanese public is currently questioning how much of their government has been run by cults all this time. Unfortunately, I know that there are some dumb people out there, so I have to state the obvious. Yes, war is wet, and secondly, no one is condoning what Tetsuya did. However, I think him willing to take his own life so that his siblings can live really pull at the heartstrings of the Japanese people. Remember, we are a nation that has stories such as the kamikaze pilots and the 47 Ronin. And no, I'm not talking about the Keanu Reeves flop. I don't think my translation did any justice, but from his Twitter account, yes, the platform that Jordan Peterson thinks is absolutely disgusting.
Twitter's a rat hole in the final analysis, and I have probably contributed to that.
Damn, Jordan. But based on Tetsuya's Twitter account and from his letter, Tetsuya seems to be really thoughtful and brilliant. Even the media's portrayal of him has changed.
極めて頭脳明晰。統一教会によって人生がめちゃくちゃになっていることが書いてましたね。
まず賢いですし、真面目ですし、不平不満も言わず。
I really hate it when news reports show random person's tweets as if they represent the opinion of the public. But yeah, this random user even goes on to say, when he was first arrested, people kept calling Tetsuya Yamagami an incel, but his arms are toned, and he has a physique that makes him look a lot younger than his actual age. And yes, it's been reported that he's been doing push-ups at the detention center, which is confusing experts. I think I've seen that scene somewhere else. Sometimes a single detail can really change the way you view an event or a person. In his tweet, Tetsuya accused his grandfather for driving his father to taking his life. I'm assuming that the grandfather gave a challenging job to his father. Does that detail change the way you view the Yamagami family dynamic now? This event has pushed to the front how dangerous brainwashing can be, and also brought the stories of Shukyo Nisei, or the child of a faith believer, to the front.
父親は教団から300万円ほどの収入を得ていたといいますが、それ以上の献金をしていたため、家庭は困窮。
入学金についても、いとこのおじさんに出してもらってたりしてましたね。今回の安倍さんの事件を受けて、中学2世がどんな気持ちだったか、こういう信条だったってことは知ってほしいなっていう話をしたんです。今日になってみたら、その田中会長のオンライン礼拝やりますみたいな感じのことを言われたんで、意味ないなと思って。
I do think that Hiroyuki was right in the sense that we have to create a society that is more considerate toward people who are being ostracized. Together, I think we can make that happen. Thank you for watching until the end. One of my really bad habits is that I often get carried away with my research, and I always try to make my videos shorter, trying to figure out what's the most important details. But this story has so many layers. It was really difficult to choose which ones to include. I did cover the topic of Shukyo Nisei slightly in this video as well. Thank you once again for watching this video, and I'll see you guys very soon.